The Williams team has been sold. Renault has withdrawn their protest against Racing Point. We remember Antoine Hubert. We also look back 29 years ago, where a young man by the name of Michael Schumacher made his debut in the world of Formula One. What else? Well, of course, it is Spa-Francorchamps. It's going to be a very, very busy show. Make sure you're nice and relaxed. Thanks for joining us on Facebook Live and YouTube. This is the F1 PitBox. It's a very good evening, and thanks very much for joining us on the F1 PitBox, of course, on the eve of the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps. As always, Gary Formato joining me. Gary, it was good to see you, my friend. Are you excited for the weekend?
I am. It's just Spa. What a track. I mean, you're always excited about Spa, and yeah, it's just great to be here this weekend. So yes, of course, very, very excited to see the cars out on this iconic and just such a fantastic racetrack.
All right, well, listen, before we get into Spa, because we'll talk about that towards the end of the show, let's just go back 2 weeks ago to the, I wouldn't say overly inspiring Spanish Grand Prix. Gary, a great victory for Lewis Hamilton. And even though the circuit of Barcelona is a magnificent circuit, unfortunately, it just doesn't lend itself to great racing in Formula One unless we have inclement weather.
Yeah, it's situation normal, I think, unfortunately, as far as Barcelona goes. But just remember, it's the kind of track where they've tested a lot. They know there's, over the years they've just gathered so much.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so it's just one of those tracks that, unfortunately, as you said, doesn't throw up good racing, should I say, all the time. It's just it is what it is. But nonetheless, it's it was a Grand Prix, and we're out there, and things are happening. So it's there's been talk of the track not sort of being involved in Formula One long term as well. But we'll see how that all goes. But you're not going to get a great race every single weekend, unfortunately. And this was just happened to be one of those.
Yeah, but you've got to take your hat off to a driver like Max Verstappen, also the strategy of Red Bull, to manage to split the two Mercedes. I mean, the Mercedes are in a league of their own, yet this young Dutchman, Max Verstappen, just pops up everywhere, and he's a bit of a thorn in their side, albeit they know that he doesn't really have the weaponry that they have. So, I mean, you've got to compliment this young guy for just giving it his all every single time.
I think that, Max Verstappen this year, is certainly proving his worth. And I think, we've always spoken of him as a future world champion or potential world champion. And, doing what he's doing this year, as you quite rightly said, by actually being up there with those Mercedes, making bold calls with the team in terms of strategy and actually making it all work, and it's sort of, it's the really good drivers like Max Verstappen that can take these alternate strategies and actually get the maximum out of them. So you cannot take anything away from him. And we said it again, and I'll say it again right now. Give him a car that's a little bit better than what he's got right now, and he's right in a championship fight. Possibly not this year, but definitely for the future.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, if you see my eyes glaring a little bit to the side, it's because I managed to actually get, the Facebook up here on my mobile. So whenever you post questions or comments, I can say hello to you as well. So if you have any questions, post them on either raceday.tv or F1 Sasha, and I'll try and get through it. So it's a very good evening to lots of people who are joining us already here. We really appreciate it that you're joining us on the F1 PitBox. That was Spain. Gary, we're going to a new Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton has got a tremendous lead over everybody else. But the great news that came out over the last 72 hours, 4 more races added to the calendar. Let's bring that calendar up now. We've got 17 races now on the calendar. We're getting to our next triple header, which starts this weekend. But Gary, Turkey, double header, Bahrain and Abu Dhabi. But to have Turkey back, I mean, listen, it is subject to approval. I must just warn you, it is subject to approval. But I mean, that was one of those circuits, Gary, where we actually went, oh, Herman Tilke got it right.
It was. We always said it was one of his best circuits, and a circuit that Felipe Massa certainly excelled at back in the day, and a great track. The thing, you mentioned the approval. I think what we've got to just understand is just what condition the circuit itself is in terms of the tarmac. It hasn't been used at all. It's obviously out there in the hot sun, and let's just hope that it is good enough to actually go racing on, because it is a fantastic circuit as well. So it's great to see Turkey back, and that was actually a circuit I was quite disappointed to see lose its slot on the F1 calendar. So it's great to see that it's back, and who knows, if it works out well, maybe it stays on, because it's a circuit that certainly deserves to be there.
Yeah, I must tell you, and everyone's so excited for Turn 8, as we know. That was actually the track that I came back, and I remember getting into the studio with you and Vic, and I said, guys, watch out for this kid by the name of Valtteri Bottas. I watched him in the GP3 race in those days. Yep. Listen, very good evening, Candice, always so good to have you along. Zakanguris Tikanis, Nigel, Tanya Borches, so great to have you, and she celebrated her birthday yesterday, so happy birthday to you as well. But people really amped about the races that are coming up. The wonderful thing that I'm very happy about, Gary, is they're doing a double header in Bahrain as opposed to Abu Dhabi. Bahrain is one of those tracks where really it can throw us some terrific races, and in my personal opinion, a much better Grand Prix circuit in terms of its layout for Formula One cars than Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, it is. It's also a great circuit. And also the nice thing about Abu Dhabi, and I've heard rumors, and I'm not sure how true it is, that they may even change the layout for the second weekend's Grand Prix. So yes, there's a lot to do in Bahrain. The circuit is fantastic, and as you said, we've seen some fantastic racing there over the years. And I'm just impressed with Formula One for getting so many races back onto the calendar. There's a time when I suppose a lot of us thought, we're even going to get 8 of them done or 10 of them done just to declare a championship. So 17 races is a proper Formula One season now. So you've got to, kudos to Formula One management and everybody else in actually making it all happen and getting to the point where they are. Who knows, maybe we even get 1 or 2 more, but it's a real championship now, which is fantastic.
It's really great news. This weekend, of course, there won't be any spectators. There won't be any spectators at Monza. There's no talk at the moment with Mugello. But Gary, Russia are selling tickets, and it looks like we are going to have a crowd. I'm not too sure if it's a full crowd at Sochi this year, but that's going to be the first Grand Prix where we're going to see some people on the stands. And I think that's also an incredible testament to the organization of the various companies together with Formula One and the FIA. That they're going through these protocols very much in the right way.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's great to see that people are going to be allowed back into the circus. I know that Nürburgring, for example, in their GT racing is starting to allow people back. So it is starting to happen. And just, while we're on the subject, we can quickly touch on it. I mean, the Indy 500 this last weekend was run in front of closed doors, and they had the lowest TV ratings they've ever had. So, there's always been this argument whether sports are electronically driven these days, if you actually need spectators. And I think the answer is simple. You need to have spectators. It just adds a certain amount of electricity to any kind of event, no matter what the sporting event is. And I'm glad to know that the fans are on their way back to Formula One eventually at some time this year. It makes all the difference for everybody involved. So that is fantastic news.
No, very much so. Great. Good evening to Stephen, to Ben, to Sean. Lenny says, hey, it was my birthday yesterday as well. Well, happy birthday, Lenny. And my girlfriend's this Sunday too. Well, good for her. Rion asks, any news on Sebastian's future? We'll talk about that in a short while. But let's move on to our next point. Some big developments over the past couple of weeks. Of course, the announcement of 4 new tracks, circuits to get us to 17 races. And then I suppose the big news, and in a way sort of inevitable, but amazing that it came out after the signing of the Concorde agreement, Gary, and that is the sale of the Williams team to an American consortium, which is called Doralton, which is very much in the financial game of life. But they are the new owners of Williams. There's not a lot that's been divulged about the deal, Gary, but the great news, and I think this is massively important, is that the Williams name will stay.
Yeah, I think great news all around, and just briefly sort of reading up on it. If the company has access to companies willing to sponsor, become partners in the team, I think that's all important, So you may be able to open up an entirely new market for yourself in terms of finding sponsorship for the team. And I think that's what they've last couple of years. So it's great that it will remain Williams. I think there's certainly value in that brand. There's no two ways about that. And if they can start, getting the team back on its feet, find sufficient funding, there's no reason why we can't see Williams start to make their way back up the field again. So I think good news and just, relief for everybody involved. The drivers, the team, everybody else involved there, that this team is actually going to be carrying on. I think it was no secret that they were in big trouble. So that's great news.
Now, Gary, let me just tell you, this is just wonderful. So we've got this Doralton group, that has now purchased the Williams team. But the share transaction, because they're an American company, but the shares transaction from Williams, a crossover, goes through a company with the letters BCE Limited in the United Kingdom. Now, if anybody knows anything about Formula One, if you go and look at BCE, those are the initials of somebody very, very special to the world of Formula One. It's not confirmed, but it does seem that Bernard Charles Eccleston Limited, somewhere along the line, has got something to do with putting this deal together. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's true.
No, absolutely not. He's we all know what he's done for the sport and just what he's about, and a deal maker of note. So, we wouldn't be surprised if he bought into the party. And there's probably a lot of other things attached to this deal as well, which we probably not, we'll never be aware of and what have you. It's interesting to see the type of company that has actually purchased the Williams Formula One team. Bearing in mind you've got Chase Carey and Liberty Media involved. So that tells you there's some money around, and I think people are expecting to make some money out of this deal. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this whole thing pans out.
Yeah, very much so. Candice, I hope that answers your question. What are your opinions about the Williams sale? I think it is very good all round. They were struggling. They weren't able to get the right kind of promoters. Now maybe with the new injection, we don't know what the management is going to look like, but there will definitely be some changes over there. We're getting more questions about Sebastian Vettel. We'll get to that in a short while. Very good evening to Angelo and Cindy also joining us as well. The engine mode restriction, we'll talk about that as well. Liana's joined us this evening. So great to have everybody. Now that I've actually got it here, Gary, I can actually see what's going on, which is quite nice, as opposed to having to look at it after we do the show. While we're on the subject of Williams, we can only put it together with Renault and, of course, Racing Point and the Concorde Agreement. So let's just talk about Renault and Racing Point. As we know, at the first Grand Prix, Gary, Renault came out and objected about the brake ducts of the Racing Point car. They said it was very, very similar to the Mercedes of last year. At testing earlier this year, the Racing Point looked just about the replica of the Mercedes from last year. And all of a sudden, after Racing Point has been given a €440,000 fine and lost 15 points, Renault have withdrawn their protest against the Racing Point after they signed the Concorde Agreement. It seems convenient, but it seems as though Renault must be very happy with the way the FIA are moving forward to clamp down on this copying gate.
Yeah, look, the Concorde Agreement is always something that none of us, nobody outside Formula One has really been privy to. So who knows what the agreement is? But a lot of people have come out in the last couple of hours and said, they're very happy with what's happened there. So I think, look, at the end of the day, it's better for everybody. They got the fine. We spoke about it, a couple of shows back, saying it's good to see teams that are being competitive. And yes, it's going to be a tough year for some of the teams that are being beaten by Racing Point, like Renault, who have invested a lot and deserve those points and what have you. But yeah, I think a lot of positivity that's come out of this latest announcement of the signing of the Concorde Agreement.
So the Concorde Agreement, was recently signed by all 10 teams. The last team to actually sign was Mercedes. Coming from a Red Bull side, they said the actual transaction or meeting about the new Concorde Agreement was relatively easy. What the Concorde Agreement means now is that the teams are locked in to where Formula One's future goes, together with Formula One Limited, the FIA, and of course the various circuit owners and television broadcasters as well. And this now will extend to the 2025 season, which is great news. It's amazing. The Concorde agreement gets signed, and then we find that Williams gets sold. So even though all 10 teams have signed this Concorde agreement, it doesn't necessarily mean that over the next 5 years, Gary, we are going to have the same teams in Formula One, but we will definitely have 10 teams, regardless of anything else. No matter how they get sold or changed, these teams, if they do default, land up with these massive fines. So I think the stability of the sport going forward is strong, and it seems as though there's this great agreement and compliance with what the FIA want the sport to achieve in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and also I think just as you mentioned, TV broadcasts, and that's a massive income stream for Formula One. And I think just the share of the revenue share, everybody seems to be far more sort of accepting and happier with the revenue share that's being put on the table, whatever that is, we all never know, but just a far better deal. We know that it has been very one-sided in the past, although the one thing that does stick out for me is that Ferrari still have a veto right, and the only team in Formula One that have a veto right, according to the Concorde agreement. So, you know, Ferrari still Ferrari at the end of the day. They've got managed to keep that that available to themselves. But I think the biggest thing is that, you know, there's got to be a share, sort of a better share of the funding, and that's going to help more teams stay in business, more teams stay competitive. And of course, you've got the budget caps coming in as well, which is going to help. So I think, you know, a lot of the smaller teams that maybe weren't allocated as much of the funds are going to start seeing some more of it, and I think that is critical and only fair.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important as well. I think also the point of Ferrari having the veto, because you're going to get people who go, well, you see, Ferrari, they're being favored by the FIA, and you know, they can do whatever they want. This is from the first ever Concorde agreement back in 1981. They've had this veto agreement. It's very few times that they've actually ever used it. But the fact that all of the teams are very happy, Gary, with what the FIA and what Formula One have proposed for this next 5 years, and Ferrari did not have to use the veto, just shows that the direction is comparable to all of the teams. And there's, you know, there might be little nitpicking about certain aspects of it, which we aren't privy to. But the fact that the general direction is very much agreed upon by all of the 10 teams is very, very important for the future of Formula One.
Yeah, certainly so. And I think for me, one of the most important things as well was that the direction of the rules is to create more sort of unpredictable racing, closer racing between all the teams, and that's what they're going to be aiming to do with the rules. We know sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. These guys are clever at finding ways around, you know, some of the regulations that are put in place. But I think it's important that we have that in Formula One. You know, and I'm going to talk about MotoGP at the moment without Marc Marquez there. It has become very unpredictable and very, very exciting. So, you know, the same goes for Formula One. We don't really want to see one team and one driver winning every single Grand Prix. And if they can come with a set of regulations and budget restrictions that are going to allow different people to win in different races, you've got a fantastic show. And the share price of Formula One goes through the roof, just like MotoGP is right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, your MotoGP is just flying at present, which is wonderful to see as well. Now, can you believe it? Gary and I were talking actually on the phone a little bit earlier, and he said to me, he said, 19 years. I said, no, Gary, 29 years ago this weekend. It's actually 2 days ago, but it doesn't matter. This weekend in Belgium, a young driver by the name of Michael Schumacher, who lied to Eddie Jordan and said, no, he knows the circuit at Spa-Francorchamps. And there is, I mean, one of the most iconic photographs ever of Michael Schumacher in that Jordan on qualifying day, where he went around and put that Jordan in 7th place, Gary, on a track he had never driven before. He had never driven a Formula One car before. And that was the beginning of one of the great careers of Formula One.
Yeah, you know, and, you know, looking back on it, you know, you knew the guy was certainly quick, and there was a big, I mean, Schumacher, there was a story around Schumacher from almost the minute he arrived in Formula One, you know, and just to take the story a little further, we know what happened at the next Grand Prix. He was signed to Benetton after a lot of wrangling. I think all-nighters pulled by Bernie Eccleston, Flavio Briatore, Tom Walkinshaw, Eddie Jordan. It affected other drivers' careers. for that matter. It was just a huge story. And, you know, Michael Schumacher had been in Formula One for all of 1 week, and that all happened. And so, and I think the other thing that you can confidently say is that Michael Schumacher would have probably won that Grand Prix had he not burnt the clutch out on the start and been a little bit more used to using the clutch in a Formula One car. And that would have just been another story all on its own. From the moment he arrived in Formula One, I mean, the impact was there, and it continued till the day he retired. You know, and that was the beginning of the Schumacher era. And I'm just going to go back to the beginning. It's 29 years ago, and I actually remember that car, that start of that Belgian Grand Prix, like it was yesterday. He really did make an impact.
Yeah, he did, massive. And I also remembered like it was yesterday. And I'm going, it's 1991, and that's what the cars were. And there was this guy, Michael Schumacher, and at the next race he was driving for Benetton, and then of course it just progressed from there. And it took him a year before he won his first race. But it was just the impact that this youngster had on Formula One was instant. It was amazing. Brian McMillan, the ex-Springbok Protea cricketer, watching us at the moment. My good friend Sean Smuts, Angelo's over there, Rian over there as well. Bradley's joined us, Gary as well, Maria. Nice to have you guys along. If you have any questions, throw them along. We've had a few about Sebastian Vettel. We'll get to that in a short while. Nicolette has just joined us as well. Great to have you along for the show as well. We'll talk about Spa-Francorchamps, Gary, this weekend's race, but we cannot forget what happened last year in the Formula 2 race. A tragic event, and we never ever like to see big accidents. I mean, if you just, you know, we spoke a little bit about MotoGP. You saw the big accidents that have happened with Marc Marquez already this season, the huge accidents with Zarco and Morbidelli. They're frightening, and a lot of people at times, I think we take it for granted that, you know, motorsport riders and drivers are immortal and nothing can happen to them. But last year we had a horrific accident. Juan Manuel Correa and Antoine Hubert, who eventually, unfortunately, succumbed to his injuries and died. And a guy that I think will always be remembered. Didn't get into Formula One, but he was definitely destined to be there.
Yes, no doubt about it. And, you know, part of that sort of young French Monegasque crew, Charles Leclerc, being one of them, and was part of that sort of deal, and was being lined up to get in there, and had won, I think, Formula 2 race or GP2 race early on in the year. Was definitely a driver to watch, and just as you quite rightly said, you know, just an unfortunate reminder that the sport is what it is sometimes, and a corner like Eau Rouge, which everybody raves about, and if you've a driver worth your salt, you're going to absolutely love that corner and relish being able to actually get the speeds that they can get through there. But, you know, unfortunately, when things do go wrong in racing, they go wrong. And it was a very, very sad weekend. But, you know, the show goes on. Everybody's got on with it. Of course, Charles went out there and won that Grand Prix for him, and the next race. And, you know, motor racing's motor racing, Sasha, unfortunately. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, 100%, Gary. I think you spot on there as well. And of course, Hubert was good friends. You mentioned Charles Leclerc, also with Pierre Gasly was one of his close friends. And we got a picture earlier on today, Pierre Gasly doing his track walk and actually going to the corner where Hubert lost his life, and just placing a wreath in memory of his good friend. So, you know, these guys were very, very close and you know, young. Especially, I think it's always more tragic, Gary, in a way, when it's somebody who's so young, with their whole life ahead of them. You know, it's definitely it hurts, and I think the guys will be very cognizant of it of this weekend when they race again.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Belgium going forward this weekend. And going back to MotoGP, they've had massive issues when it comes to track limits. In Formula One, we've had issues with track limits. I always think of the United States Grand Prix at Austin. The guys coming through turn 3, they always run a little bit wide, and you always sit and think to yourself, you know what, guys, if there was kitty litter over there and a concrete wall, you would not go there and test the limits. And that's why they do have track limits, Gary, and that's why these rules are in place, and that's why they are severe on these kinds of penalties. And this week at Belgium, again, they've come out. They've basically said ruddy on. So I mean, that's coming out of Eau Rouge up ruddy on. You've got to make sure that you've got your wheels all on the right areas. But also at Rivage and the final chicane onto the start-finish straight as well. They're going to be monitoring the track limits. Now that's all well and good, Gary, when it comes to qualifying, because you can disqualify the lap and not let the driver get the lap. But what do you do in race conditions where you've got 2 laps to go and all of a sudden you've got track limits exceeded, as they did in the Moto2 race last week? They demoted the winner because of track limits. Can Formula One be that severe?
They have to be. I mean, it's as simple as that. And the track, the safety factor involved in putting that extra runoff area is that's what's key. You know, it's a safety issue. It's not a speed issue. So yes, if there was grass there, and I mean, when I was just grass there, so you didn't want to go off there. But I can promise you right now, there were certain times when you wished that there was more runoff area there, and it was a safer place. So the track limits I think are important. You've got to have it there, and you know, depending on who you speak to, there'll always be an argument for it. But at the end of the day, it is safer to have the tracks the way that they are right now. And we've got the technology now to also monitor those the track limits. And yes, they've got to use them. And if somebody exceeds the limits, whenever it is in the Grand Prix and it's going to change the Grand Prix, well, then they're going to get the penalty, and that's going to be that. You know, it's just the way that it's got to be.
Yeah, no, it is crazy, and I do agree, and I think they do have to clamp down on these, because I always reference it to saying, if there was kitty litter there or a concrete wall, Gary, you know exactly where your limits are going into the corner, and if you do go in there a little bit hot, you know you're going to crash and you're going to be completely out of the race. So they have to be respected. That's the way that I see it.
They've got to do it, but you know, even if there was just grass there, for example, you would see crashes, because sometimes, I'm not saying sometimes, you know, drivers or riders or whatever, take a chance. You know, there's an opportunity, there's an open door. You've got to be a little bit late on the brakes. You're gonna stick your nose in there or try and get past somebody. You know, that's what these guys do. They're risk takers, and you know, this also just allows them, even in that situation. Yeah, sure, you may get a penalty, but at least it keeps you in the race instead of sticking off in the wall and now you've lost 2 cars or a car or whatever it may be, because you didn't have that extra runoff area. So, yes, as I said, I've had my differing opinions on it, but at the end of the day, if it's for safety and it's going to make it better, then it's something that needs to happen.
100%. Before we talk about the dynamics and maybe the teams to watch out for this weekend at Spa, let's talk about the driver market, because it is hotting up. We've got the Sebastian Vettel Racing Point perhaps deal that some people expect to be announced this week, and yet on the other side you've got Sergio Perez, Gary, who's come out and says he's not talking to any other teams. He believes his future is safe at Racing Point, which means that, you know, we might have Sebastian Vettel out for a year, or unfortunately, I would hate to say, leaving Formula One.
Listen, it's going to be what it's going to be, and I think that you know, perhaps Checo Perez is missing 2 Grand Prix because of his travel arrangements has sort of sorted out his future, because one would have to assume that there's an extra bit that's come back to Europe with him in his briefcase. So, you know, this is how this game works, and yes, maybe a sabbatical is what Vettel needs. You know, and I go back to Alain Prost. Remember, Alain Prost sat out for 1990. Was it 1993 when he sat out? I think.
92 he sat out, and back in 93.
Yes, and came back with a great car and actually won the championship the very next year after his sabbatical. So, you know, sometimes maybe, you know, Vettel's still young. You know, he has got the ability to sit out for a season. You know, you saw what happened to Hulkenberg a couple of weekends ago. You know, he's put himself back in the market sort of overnight when he was right out of it. Anything can happen. Vettel's not going to be out of the market to the extent that Hulkenberg was, because he's a 4-time world champion and he's Sebastian Vettel. Maybe sit out and wait for a better opportunity to arrive. I don't think it's critical that he's there. We'd love to see him there for sure. We'd hate to see Sebastian Vettel not in Formula One. I think the big travesty would be if he didn't find something going forward and we never saw him again in Formula One. But I just can't see him not being in Formula One going forward at his age, and just looking at what his career is and what he's done.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agree. Maybe the sabbatical, we'll have to wait and see. So you mentioned Nico Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg, of course, share price elevated after his comeback race where he stood in for Checo Perez. And the big question is now, yes, there might be some teams that offer him a reserve driver role, which I think is just nonsensical in the way that the rules of Formula One are at present. But you've got to believe that. Teams like Haas, teams like Alfa Romeo, Williams, I think Latifi and Russell are pretty secure over there. So there aren't many options for Nico Hulkenberg, but he could go into either one of those teams as very much a leader, Gary, and with also a very, very strong brand.
No, absolutely. And listen, you cannot take away what he did in that last Grand Prix by out-qualifying his teammate and getting that car right up to the front end of the field, having not driven anything since his last Grand Prix last year. Yes, the guys had all sat out over the COVID-19 period and what have you, but they tested at the beginning of the year, they'd done a lot, they'd worked in the simulator a lot. The guys were up to speed with what was going on as much as you could possibly be. He wasn't. Went back, sat in the simulator the week, after the first leg of the British Grand Prix, spent time in the simulator, learned more about what he needed to do and just how the whole car worked and all the systems worked, and went out there and did what he did. Yes, the race didn't go too well, but you can't take away from what he did. So, I mean, he would have been an absolute asset for somebody like Haas or even Alfa. And, Alfa kind of is the one for me that really, if there was anywhere to go, I'd like to see him go there. I've got to be honest with you. Remember, he also missed out on that Ferrari seat many years back. He was in big talks and touted for Ferrari. It didn't happen, and it would be great to see him, at Alfa Romeo, in this sort of family again there.
Yeah, and it's quite amazing because Kimi Räikkönen was asked actually earlier today, where's his future? What's he going to do? And he's basically sat there and said he hasn't decided yet. Yes, he's got to look at his family commitments and the way they travel, and his kids are getting a little bit older, so you completely understand that. But on the flip side of it, his home in Switzerland, one of his many homes is in Switzerland, very close to Hinwil, where Alfa Romeo is. So there's not a lot of extended travel besides going to the Grand Prix. And at Grand Prix, he takes his whole family with him in any case. So, Räikkönen is just a question of desire. Does he still want to race? And he's most probably the cog at the moment, deciding the future of Antonio Giovinazzi, Nico Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Grosjean, people like Callum Eilert, Robert Schwartzman, Mick Schumacher. I mean, there's 7 drivers there who are all hinging for most probably 4 places on the grid, and maybe he's all determined of what Kimi Räikkönen decides to do.
And we all love Kimi, and you cannot underestimate what Kimi's done and the kind of driver that he is. But you've got to be honest. If you were a team and somebody says to you, well, it's my hobby now. Formula One's not a hobby. Formula One's Formula One. You want people there that are hungry as hell to achieve and to succeed. And yes, he's got talent, and that talent maybe allows him to be a little more relaxed than maybe some people in his approach. And I'm not taking anything away, but to have guys, as you said, like Schwartzman, Hulkenberg, those guys that are super hungry out there, you've got to start looking at those guys now, apart from a guy that's there because, and he's admitted, it's just a hobby.
Yeah, no. I mean, listen, I'm a massive Kimi fan. I would sit there and clean out a couple of teams in Formula One. Haas, even though they've re-signed the Concorde agreement, Gary, let's just talk about the last 2 of them, Romain Grosjean and, of course, Kevin Magnussen. You got to believe both of them are on edge and could well be replaced. And the way that Ferrari are struggling, and yes, they're the suppliers of the Haas team, they might offer some good carrots to Haas by saying, listen, take these drivers and don't worry, don't pay for your engines. That kind of a deal. And we could see an Eilert and a Mick Schumacher and a Schwartzman all of a sudden all on the grid next year as Ferrari junior drivers.
You know what? That's not the worst thing I've heard at all, because at the end of the day, I mean, look, whatever. Carlos Sainz is a good driver. We know it's all good, but he's in the team. All great. I don't think, and I may be wrong, and I'm gonna stick my neck out here. I don't think he's the kind of driver that, should something happen to Leclerc while he's battling for a championship, I don't think Sainz is going to be the guy that's going to be able to pick up and actually fight for that championship, kind of like an Eddie Irvine situation where he couldn't really get the job done. And if you've got superstars out there or potential superstars, you've got to put them in somewhere to start learning, and it makes a lot of sense. Red Bull's done a fantastic job at it. George Russell is in Williams. We know the connection to Mercedes-Benz. I think you've got to give these youngsters race experience that, should things happen, they can pick up the pieces and get in. It's difficult to get the things under control in Formula One these days. You do need a bit of experience, and I don't think you can waste that. But anyway, let's see what happens behind the scenes. There's probably a lot more than we ever will know about that's happening behind the scenes right now. But certainly these youngsters that are proving to be quick, and I think they need a shot, apart from guys that are 40 years old.
Yeah, no. I agree with that sentiment. Very good evening, Paul Nell joining us. Candace says, let Hülkenberg replace Grosjean, please. Give Haas, Alfa Romeo, and Ferrari maybe slightly better cars, and might see a different kind of approach, but they all have what they have. Gary, let's talk a little bit about what we can look forward to this weekend, and I'm going to keep the weather until the last. Let's say, hypothetically, dry race. Mercedes, if they get out in front, and that's the only negative I have about the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, is that if your car has got more power than somebody else, it just gets extended over the course of one lap. And I mean, you can be 5-6 seconds ahead of somebody else just because of the better design and power of your vehicle. But you've got to believe Mercedes are going to be right up there. And Racing Point, you've got to believe that they're going to be fighting, especially when it comes to qualifying for the second row.
You have to believe that. And yes, it is a track that requires a good car, good engine, good handling, good aerodynamics. If you're Ferrari and you've got a drag issue, kind of Spa is not the place you want to be right now, because this thing needs to get going. So it's. Listen, there's also been some great races at Spa. That's the thing, it's not always that it's just been how it's been. Yes, there's some times when somebody runs away with it, but you can rattle off a lot of races where there's been some fantastic racing happening. I mean, I'll just go back to Schumacher, Häkkinen, Dykes passing Zonta, races in the rain that have been fantastic. Kimi Räikkönen against Lewis Hamilton. There's been some really good racing at Spa. So, this one is not a guaranteed a sleep fest. There's no two ways about that. But yes, it is the kind of track where if you've got a good car, you need good aerodynamics, good power. It's certainly going to be an advantage, like it is everywhere. But here at this track, it's really going to be an advantage.
So the other thing is, I mean, that's Racing Point and Mercedes, one has to sort of, in a way, compare the two. But Red Bull, you just cannot discount someone like Max Verstappen at present, and Albon hopefully getting a little bit more comfortable and more confident. But Max is definitely going to be there to hunt down the Mercedes boys. And, if he's on the first row of the grid or the second row of the grid, that he's going to be fighting for it all the way through. So don't discount Red Bull and Max Verstappen.
No, absolutely not. And I think what's been quite fantastic with regards to that combination is the strategy that they've gone for, the alternate strategy they've gone for in the last couple of races, and it's really worked well for them. So I'm quite interested to see if they've got anything else up their sleeve this weekend. It's nice to see people making those bold moves. It may work, but it may not work. But I love seeing it work. So I think we can look out for something similar to that. And you'll get to where they're now. Anything can happen at this track.
Now, the amazing thing is, I mean, Charles Leclerc won last year. I mean, it was magnificent. It was his first victory. It was something very, very special for him. All of a sudden this year, Gary, they're part of the midfield. Who's going to be the best out of Ferrari, McLaren, Renault? AlphaTauri, I think, a little bit of an outside of chance. But McLaren, Renault, and Ferrari, I mean, these guys are going to be fighting for 8th, 9th, and 10th.
More than likely, yes, it's going to be the case. It is bizarre. It is bizarre. So, but again, you got to get it right all the time. And Ferrari, we know this year that just hasn't been good. And last year, let's be honest, they had that engine in the back, whatever it was or whatever was going on in that engine. That's what they had, and he managed to win the race. So, I don't think they're going to ride with that setup in the back of the car this weekend, and it's going to make life a lot more difficult than it was for them last year.
Okay. Last point, you mentioned the engine. We did have a question coming through a little bit about the engine and the loophole. There's nothing in place for this Grand Prix in Belgium, but from Monza, what the FIA have said is that there can only be one mode chosen by the teams, whichever mode it is that they want, that has to be used in qualifying and the race, to eliminate what they're saying is the or party mode, extra power when it comes to the qualifying sessions. So Gary, there are a lot of people saying, oh, it's just a way of trying to get Mercedes to slow down. However, it is much more complicated than that. The FIA, somewhere along the line, believe that when the teams are asking for extra development to improve the reliability of the engines, they suspect that some of that reliability is going to tweaking the electronic units and the various modes that they have. And the FIA, of course, tried to get on top of it to try and make the engines as legitimate as possible. Do you buy into it that the FIA are trying to slow Mercedes down intentionally by doing this?
You're asking the wrong guy here, because again, there was an area in Formula One where I believe they changed a lot of rules to slow a certain person down. So yes, it could well be the case, but in this instance, I do believe it's a developmental issue and an issue where it's difficult for them to police. And instead of being able to, if they can't police it, there's two options: either let it go and let people do what they want, or just shut down the avenue. And I think in this case, it's just been shutting down the avenues made a lot more sense for everybody. Because yes, give any team a chance to fiddle with anything, whether it's in the interest of reliability or whatever it is. Everybody's looking for performance, and that's a given. So maybe done the right thing to shut the avenue down and just try and curb the development, which some teams may have access to and some teams don't.
Yeah, very much so. I think what we are going to see is not this drastic all of a sudden improvement from the other teams and Mercedes going backwards, especially when it comes into effect at Monza. The Mercedes, even if you just look at their Q2 times throughout qualifying, Gary, are quicker than anybody else. So that on its own tells you that they're really quick in that form. So I don't believe this is going to hinder them that much. But hopefully the FIA are doing the right thing. And as you say, either it's got to be free for all for everybody, or they've got to clamp this down to sit there and say, well, listen, let's just get all of the engines relatively similar on power, and then that on its own will lend to closer racing.
Well, I think it also just, it's difficult because that's one element, that we think that certain teams have better or working on. We don't know what everybody else is doing, so it shuts down one avenue, and they'll be working on another avenue to try and get it better. That's the thing as well with these things. You close one door, and they're probably already working on the next door. So as this closes, they're well into the next phase of trying to find something else.
There we go. But there's one variable when it comes to the Spa-Francorchamps circuit set in the magnificent Ardennes Mountains, and that, of course, is the weather. And the amazing thing about the weather over in Spa, Gary, it's never mind 4 seasons in a day, it's 4 seasons in an hour. And, it can be warm, and then it can be raining on certain parts of the track, and then the next minute it dries out, and 20 minutes later it rains again. The prediction, as you can see, there's 80% chance rain for this coming Sunday. There it says 14% chance, but that is actually today. But on Sunday, it's an 80% chance of rain during at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So if that happens, it's either going to rain for a couple of hours. They might start off on medium intermediary tires. Alternatively, it could be a dry race. So it's one of those places when it comes to Spa, you just don't know. But I do, in a way, hope that there is a little bit of inclement weather just to spice things up a little bit. But having said that, we do have some great races in the dry conditions there as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, my concern with the rain, unfortunately, is that, Hamilton and Mercedes are such a good combination. And, we saw it previously in qualifying, was it Austria, where it rained, and they were just untouchable in the rain. So if it does rain, it may even be easier for them. But having said that, the chances of something happening, losing the car, going off the road, whatever, are great. And yes, for sure, it could certainly throw the cat amongst the pigeons. But I certainly if it's qualifying, on a Saturday afternoon, if it happened to be raining in qualifying, you know, I would certainly say that Hamilton's, you know, in the pound seats.
Yeah, 100%. There's a 60% chance as well. Neville asked an interesting question. Guys, why don't you just build another engine and use it? Take the penalties. Far better than the fans to see their car is a rather cuck. Neville, unfortunately, this all comes down to the rules that actually determine how you can develop engines. And then, of course, it also comes down to costs. It's taken 6 years of development at billions and billions of dollars across Renault, Honda, Ferrari, and Mercedes to get these engines to what they are. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, we'll toss that one out and bring a new one in. But it's also very much against the regulations, and that's why Ferrari have come out, you know, a good few races ago saying, unfortunately, fans, this is what we are stuck with at present. There's no real going forward unless, besides going into 2021 with the token system. They're stuck where they are, Gary.
They certainly are. And just, you know, maybe just to highlight that point again, just look at McLaren Honda. You know, when Honda arrived in Formula One after a year of everybody else being there, you would have assumed that they'd maybe gotten an idea of what to do and just what, you know, what people were doing in terms of building the engine, and they struggled for a long time to get to where they are now. It's not an easy thing. And these engines are so complex. It's not just about the motor. There's just everything else that goes with it. These days, it makes it a very, very complex power unit. Not even an engine anymore, the power unit, because there's so many variables in that system. Yeah,
quite amazing stuff. Well, listen, that just about wraps it up. We've got our obligatory pictures coming up in a short while. Listen, thanks for all of the comments that have come through. We really, really appreciate it. If you do have any more questions, keep posting them there, and of course Gary and I will get to them. There is the Alfa photograph for the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, and well, at least I've got that going for them. They're not going to be that quick, and they're going to be racing with the Haas and the Williams towards the back, but I'm sure they'll have some fun as well. Gary, our obligatory Alfa photograph for the day. We've actually got 2 of them, and how is this? This lady is 50 years old. She turned 50 years old 2 days ago. The beautiful Claudia Schiffer, and of course the Alfa Romeo Giulietta. You know, just to put a smile on our face. Girls, don't worry. I'll get some pictures of guys next to cars as well. Gary's actually going to go outside now and take a photo, and we'll post it next week. Gary, it's going to be a great race. I'm sure of it, and it's a triple header. I mean, we've got this, and we've got 2 Italian races back to much, which I think is going to be stunning. So, yeah, F1 fully back. There we go. There's our calendar. Belgium, we've got Monza, then we've got Mugello, which I think is going to be hairy. And then, of course, we're going to have a 2-week break, and then another back-to-back session with Russia and Germany. So lots to look forward to. 4 new races on the calendar, Gary. Yeah, let's just carry on going. Let's have fun.
We got to enjoy it. You know, look, I mean, this is normally, you know, coming to the end of the European season. Normally, it's, you know, Spa and then Monza, and off they go. So I'm quite excited that they're staying in Europe. All these other tracks that, you know, Portimao, I'm excited about. Mugello, I'm excited about. So I mean, I'm excited about it. This is something different, and yeah. What else can I say? You know, I love the European stuff. So I'm sitting for a little bit longer than usual.
Yeah, I think it is going to be amazing. Thanks very much for joining us. Huge thanks to Fritz and to Henk, of course, putting the whole show together. Hopefully, hold thumbs, next week we might have something a little bit different on the show. We won't spoil it just yet, but that's what we are hoping for. Gary, as always, my friend, you look after yourself, and yeah, we'll chat up during the course of the weekend. For the rest, thanks very much for joining us on the F1 Pitbox. Please share it amongst all of your mates as well. And yeah, follow us on raceday.tv and F1 Sasha for all of the updates in the world of Formula One. Otherwise, enjoy the Grand Prix this weekend. Enjoy your evening. Take care. Ciao, ciao.